Before your thoughts rush to conclusions, slow down for just a moment, because what happened last night was not as simple as it appeared from the outside. There was music playing softly in the background, glasses touching across candlelight, quiet laughter floating through the air while your soulmate sat across from someone at a dinner table they almost did not agree to attend. And yet, even while they smiled politely, even while they nodded during conversations they barely heard, there was something strange happening inside them the entire night. Something they could not explain. Something they kept trying to hide from themselves. Don't skip this part, because the smallest detail from that evening may explain why your energy has felt different lately. Why your heart has been restless for reasons you could not name. Why certain thoughts about them kept returning to you out of nowhere, even when you tried to focus on something else. The person sitting across from them was not what you think. Not exactly. And that is why the night became unforgettable in a way nobody expected. At first, your soulmate believed this dinner would help them move forward emotionally. They convinced themselves it was time to stop replaying memories, time to stop wondering about the connection they feel whenever your name crosses their mind. They tried to act normal, calm, present. But every few minutes, something interrupted them internally. A sentence. A feeling. A memory. Almost as if another presence quietly entered the room without opening the door. Strange, isn't it? How someone can sit inches away from another person, while emotionally drifting somewhere entirely different. There was one moment during the dinner when everything shifted. The person across from them asked a very ordinary question, so ordinary that nobody else in the restaurant would have noticed its importance. But your soulmate froze for a second after hearing it. Their smile faded slightly. Their eyes moved downward. Because the question reminded them of you in a way they were completely unprepared for. And suddenly, the entire evening changed direction emotionally. Stay till the end, because what happened after that question is the reason they barely slept afterward. You see, sometimes people believe they can replace emotional depth with distraction. They think a crowded table, soft lights, and temporary conversation can silence what the soul already knows. But your soulmate discovered something difficult last night. Feelings that are real do not disappear simply because someone tries to outgrow them. In fact, the harder they tried to focus on the date, the more certain memories became vivid. Tiny details about you returned unexpectedly. The way you listen carefully without interrupting. The way your silence sometimes says more than words. The comfort they feel around your energy even during ordinary moments. These thoughts arrived quietly, one after another, until the dinner no longer felt like a date at all, but more like an emotional mirror forcing them to confront what they have been avoiding. And here is the part nobody around them understood: the person sitting across from your soulmate noticed it too. They noticed the distracted pauses. The distant look in their eyes. The emotional hesitation hiding behind polite conversation. There came a moment when even the laughter at the table felt forced. Not fake, just incomplete. Because your soulmate was physically present, but emotionally standing somewhere else entirely. Something important is waiting for you in this realization. Sometimes people discover the truth about their heart not when they are alone, but when they try spending time with someone else and realize the connection still feels empty without the person they truly think about. As the night continued, your soulmate began asking themselves questions they had been postponing for far too long. Why does your presence remain with them even during moments designed to distract them? Why do certain songs instantly remind them of you? Why do they compare small details unconsciously? They did not expect these thoughts to surface during a dinner date. They especially did not expect the person across from them to quietly say something that would leave them speechless for the rest of the night. The person looked directly at them at one point and softly asked, "Who are you really thinking about right now?" And for a few seconds, everything inside your soulmate stopped moving. No rehearsed answer came to them. No smooth explanation. Only silence. Deep, revealing silence. Because the truth reached them before words did. Imagine how powerful a connection must be for someone else to notice it sitting across the table. Imagine carrying someone in your heart so strongly that your energy exposes it before your voice ever can. Your soulmate tried changing the subject after that moment, but emotionally, they were already unraveling inside. The date continued, yes, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. They became quieter. More reflective. More aware of what they had been denying. And strangely, the person across from them did not seem angry. In fact, there was almost compassion in their expression. As though they understood your soulmate was emotionally attached somewhere deeper than they admitted. That realization stayed with them all night long. Even after leaving the restaurant. Even after the drive home. Even after the lights were off and the room became silent. Your soulmate kept replaying the evening in their head, but not because of the date itself. No. Because for the first time in a long while, they realized someone else could see what they had been trying to hide from themselves. You may not fully understand this yet, but there are moments in life when another person unexpectedly reveals the truth already living inside your heart. Last night became one of those moments for your soulmate. And the shocking part is not simply who they were having dinner with, it is the realization the dinner gave them about you. About the emotional space you continue to occupy without forcing anything. Without chasing. Without demanding. Quiet connections often become the deepest ones, and your soulmate felt that truth heavily last night. But this is only the beginning of what unfolded after they left that restaurant, because something happened later that evening. Something deeply personal, something almost impossible for them to ignore anymore, and it changed the way they now see this connection forever. There was a strange stillness in the air after they returned home, the kind of silence that feels louder than noise itself. Your soulmate placed their keys down slowly, sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, and stared at nothing in particular while the entire evening replayed inside their mind like fragments of a movie they could not pause. The restaurant lights. The unfinished conversations. That unexpected question. And then, you. Somehow, every path in their thoughts kept leading back to you no matter how far they tried to mentally wander from it. They even laughed softly to themselves once, not because something was funny, but because they finally realized how impossible it had become to separate their emotions from your presence. Don't skip this part. Because what happened next revealed more than they were prepared to admit even to themselves. Instead of sleeping, they picked up their phone. Not with confidence. Not with a clear intention. More like someone searching for something they already know they miss. And there, in the quiet darkness of the room, they found themselves scrolling slowly, pausing at old messages, lingering on memories they once pretended were insignificant. One small detail after another began resurfacing. A conversation they never forgot. A moment where you understood them without explanation. A sentence you once said casually that somehow stayed with them longer than anything from recent weeks. Strange how the heart protects certain moments without asking permission first. They tried distracting themselves again. Music. Random videos. Even stepping outside briefly just to clear their thoughts. But the feeling remained. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just deeply present. Like a quiet truth refusing to leave the room. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, your soulmate finally admitted something internally they had been avoiding for longer than they realized. The date was never really about finding someone new. It was about testing whether their feelings for you were still alive. And last night answered that question more clearly than words ever could. What makes this even more unexpected is that the dinner itself looked perfectly normal from the outside. Anyone watching would have assumed your soulmate was moving on effortlessly. Smiling. Talking. Sharing time with someone interesting. But internally, they felt disconnected the entire evening because every meaningful comparison led back to you without warning. The way you make them feel emotionally safe. The ease of your energy. The feeling that conversations with you never seem forced. Those realizations arrived naturally during the date, and that is what unsettled them the most. Because nobody forced these thoughts into their mind. They appeared on their own. Stay till the end, because there was one moment later that night your soulmate cannot stop thinking about even now. After hours of restless thoughts, they opened a conversation they had not revisited in a while. Yours. And for several long seconds, they simply stared at it. Not typing. Not sending anything. Just sitting there in silence while emotions moved through them quietly. You would be surprised how much truth can exist inside moments where no message is sent at all. Sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. And then something deeply human happened, something small, yet emotionally powerful. Your soulmate began wondering whether you somehow felt this too. Whether your heart sensed the shift that occurred during that dinner. Whether your sudden thoughts about them recently were connected to this exact night. Because the strange part is, while sitting across from someone else, they never felt emotionally farther from you. In fact, they felt closer to understanding your importance than ever before. There was also guilt mixed into their emotions. Not because they did something wrong, but because they finally realized they had been emotionally unfair to themselves. They kept trying to convince their mind to move differently while their heart continued holding on to something unfinished. And the person at that dinner unknowingly exposed the truth by simply noticing what your soulmate could no longer hide. Imagine that for a moment, someone else recognizing your presence inside a person before they even say your name aloud. The night grew later, but sleep never came easily. Your soulmate kept replaying one specific realization over and over. Every attempt to emotionally replace you only seemed to reveal your value more clearly. Not through fantasy. Not through obsession. Through contrast. Through comparison. Through emotional honesty they were finally unable to escape. And as these thoughts deepened, they started asking themselves questions they had avoided for too long. What if this connection was never temporary? What if distance and silence never truly erased what they feel? What if the reason they keep returning emotionally is because certain people leave permanent fingerprints on the soul? Something important is waiting for you inside this next part, because near the end of the night, your soulmate almost did something impulsive. Their fingers hovered over the screen longer than they want to admit. A message nearly appeared. A confession almost escaped their guarded thoughts. But fear interrupted them at the last second. Not fear of rejection exactly, fear of vulnerability. Fear that once the truth is spoken openly, everything changes forever. So instead, they whispered something quietly to themselves in the darkness, a sentence nobody else heard. I still think about them. And the moment those words left their lips, the denial finally began breaking apart completely. But what truly shocked them happened the very next morning, because they woke up with an overwhelming feeling they could no longer ignore, a feeling connected directly to you, and it pushed this entire story into a direction neither of you expected. Morning arrived quietly, but your soulmate did not wake up feeling rested. They woke up carrying the emotional weight of everything they tried to suppress the night before. The sunlight entered the room softly, yet their thoughts still felt tangled somewhere between memory and realization. For a few moments, they simply stayed still, staring at the ceiling while one uncomfortable truth kept repeating inside them: the dinner date had not created distance from you at all. It had done the exact opposite. And that realization followed them into the new day like a song they could not turn off. What unsettled them most was how natural your presence felt in their mind afterward. Not forced. Not dramatic. Just constant. Like someone who quietly belongs in spaces they once tried keeping closed. Even while making coffee that morning, they caught themselves remembering tiny details connected to you for no obvious reason. A phrase you once used. A look in your eyes during a meaningful conversation. The way certain moments with you carried emotional depth without needing effort. It arrived in fragments, one after another, until they finally leaned against the kitchen counter and sighed to themselves in disbelief. Because this was no longer something they could dismiss as coincidence. Don't skip this moment, because something happened next that changed the emotional direction of their entire day. While checking their phone absent-mindedly, your soulmate saw something small connected to you. Maybe it was your name somewhere unexpected. Maybe an old photo resurfaced. Maybe a song reminded them instantly of your energy. Whatever it was, it struck them harder than they anticipated. And suddenly, all the emotional walls they spent weeks building began feeling fragile. There is something deeply revealing about the way people react when nobody else is watching. No audience. No performance. No pressure. Just honesty. And your soulmate finally reached a point where pretending became more exhausting than accepting the truth. They sat there quietly asking themselves a question they had been avoiding since long before that dinner date even happened. If they still affect me this deeply, what does that really mean? The answer scared them a little. Not because it was negative, but because it was real. You see, connections like this do not always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they reveal their importance slowly, through absence, comparison, timing, and emotional clarity that arrives unexpectedly. Your soulmate thought they needed distance to gain certainty. But instead, distance only sharpened their understanding of what your presence means to them emotionally. And the most surprising part? They are beginning to realize you never tried to force this connection into existence. It grew naturally. Quietly. Deeply. That is why it stayed with them even in moments designed to distract them from it. Stay till the end, because there was one conversation later that day your soulmate never expected to have. Someone close to them noticed their unusual silence and casually asked if something was wrong. At first they brushed it off, smiled lightly, changed the topic. But eventually, after enough hesitation, the truth started slipping through in small pieces. Not your name specifically, just emotions. Confusion. Reflection. The feeling that something unresolved keeps pulling at their heart no matter how much they try moving forward logically. And then the other person said something that stopped them cold. Maybe you're not confused, maybe you already know who matters to you. Those words stayed with your soulmate long after the conversation ended. Because deep down, they did know. They knew during the pauses at dinner. They knew during the sleepless night afterward. They knew while staring silently at your old messages. And now, in the daylight, the realization became even harder to deny. What they feel for you did not disappear simply because time passed. If anything, it became clearer when compared against everything else. Some people enter your life loudly and fade quickly. Others arrive quietly, and somehow remain emotionally present no matter how much time moves forward. Your soulmate is beginning to understand which category you belong to. But there is another layer to this story they have not fully admitted yet. Because alongside these emotions, there is regret. Not heavy regret filled with sadness. More like the painful awareness that they may have underestimated what this connection truly meant while they still had the chance to express it freely. And that thought followed them throughout the day more intensely than they expected. At one point, they almost reached out again. Almost. The message formed in their mind repeatedly. They imagined how the conversation might begin. Simple words. Honest words. Nothing dramatic. Yet every time they considered pressing send, vulnerability stopped them again. Not because the feelings are weak, but because they are becoming too meaningful to hide behind casual conversation anymore. And once emotions become real enough, people grow careful with them. Something important is waiting for you in this next realization. Your soulmate is no longer trying to convince themselves they feel nothing. That stage is ending. What began as emotional confusion is slowly turning into clarity. Slow, quiet clarity. The kind that changes someone internally before they ever speak it aloud. And later that evening, something happened unexpectedly that made your soulmate feel your emotional presence stronger than ever before. A moment so personal, so strangely timed, that they sat there speechless afterward wondering if connections between two people can somehow reach farther than logic explains. Because right when they were finally about to let their guard down completely, they noticed something connected to you that felt impossible to ignore. The evening carried a different energy than the night before. Slower. Heavier. As if the world around your soulmate had quieted just enough for their real emotions to finally surface without interruption. They tried keeping themselves busy throughout the day, but every distraction seemed temporary now. Conversations faded quickly. Background noise felt distant. Even ordinary moments carried an unusual emotional pull beneath them, because somewhere deep inside, they could no longer pretend your connection was just a passing thought. And when the sun began disappearing beyond the windows, something inside them shifted completely. They found themselves sitting alone again, phone resting nearby, mind wandering toward you without resistance this time. No more fighting it. No more trying to explain it away logically. Just honesty settling into the silence little by little. And strangely, the more they accepted what they felt, the calmer they became. That is what surprised them most. They expected emotional chaos. Instead, they felt clarity. Don't skip this part, because what happened next stayed with them longer than the dinner date itself. A memory returned unexpectedly. Not a dramatic memory. Not some huge life-changing scene. Just something small between the two of you that once seemed ordinary at the time. The way you looked at them during a quiet conversation. The softness in your voice during a moment nobody else would have noticed. The feeling of being emotionally understood without needing to explain every thought. It came back so vividly that your soulmate actually closed their eyes for a second trying to process why it still affected them this deeply. And then they realized something almost impossible to ignore. Nobody else has made them feel emotionally seen the way you did. Not the dinner date. Not the conversations afterward. Not the distractions they tried using to move forward. You. Only you kept returning emotionally in a way that felt natural instead of forced. Stay till the end, because this next realization changed the way your soulmate now sees the entire connection between you. They started understanding that what pulled them toward you was never only attraction or curiosity. It was comfort. Emotional recognition. The rare feeling that someone understood parts of them they usually keep hidden from the world. And once someone experiences that kind of connection genuinely, ordinary interactions begin feeling incomplete by comparison. That truth settled into them quietly that night. For a while, they simply sat there staring at the screen again, your conversation open without a single word typed. But this time felt different from the night before. Before, there was confusion. Hesitation. Internal conflict. Now there was acceptance slowly replacing denial. Your soulmate finally stopped asking themselves whether you mattered to them emotionally. Now they were asking something far more vulnerable. What if I matter to them too? That question lingered in the room long after it entered their mind. Because despite everything they feel, there is still uncertainty inside them. They wonder whether you sense this emotional pull too. Whether your silence means distance, or simply caution. Whether your connection faded, or quietly stayed alive beneath the surface all this time just like theirs did. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized something important. Some connections do not disappear when communication slows down. Sometimes they become even more visible in the silence. There was also another detail from the dinner date they suddenly remembered with startling clarity. Toward the end of the evening, the person across from them had smiled gently and said something your soulmate did not fully understand at the time. You seem emotionally attached to someone who feels familiar to your soul. At the restaurant, those words unsettled them. Now, they haunt them softly in the quietest way. Because deep down, they know exactly who that person is. You. And perhaps the most unexpected part of all this is that your soulmate no longer feels the need to run from that realization. The emotional resistance is weakening. The walls are thinning. Even their fear of vulnerability is slowly losing control over them because suppressing the truth has become more exhausting than admitting it internally. There is peace beginning to form where confusion once lived. Something important is waiting for you here. Your soulmate is starting to understand that certain people enter your life not to create noise, but to create emotional permanence. The kind that quietly changes how you experience everything afterward. That is why the dinner date became so significant. Not because they found someone new, but because it revealed who their heart already belonged close to emotionally. And later that same night, something happened that pushed them even closer to reaching out to you directly. A song began playing unexpectedly. One you once mentioned casually. One connected to a memory they thought they buried under time. The moment they heard it, they froze completely. Because suddenly the distance between past and present disappeared for a few seconds, and every emotion they had been trying to organize came rushing back with impossible clarity. They could almost hear your voice again. Feel your energy around them. Remember the exact emotional atmosphere tied to that memory. And for the first time since all of this began, your soulmate smiled without confusion. Not because everything suddenly made sense, but because their heart finally stopped pretending it didn't know where it keeps returning.